Hello, this is episode 20 of the Cognitive Gamer Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Blessing. I'm joined today with a guest, Dr. Jennifer Blessing. Jen was a guest on episode 9, where we talked about how games can promote counting strategies. Jen, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
If you listened last time, you might remember that Jen is a developmental psychologist, meaning that she studies changes in how children think. During our last discussion, we spoke about how kids count and how playing games can help promote more sophisticated number sense. We would like to continue that discussion by talking about how playing easier games can enable play of more complex games later on. If you're playing games with your kids, you're not going to sit down and play Twilight Struggle or Terraforming Mars right away. Instead, you're going to start simple with something like Sushi Go or maybe King Domino. There appears to be a progression that works maybe not only with kids but also with adults in terms of starting with simple games and gradually adding in complexity. So Jen, as a developmental psychologist, what might explain this?
Well, the way we should think about it is first that some games are completely overwhelming. As we know as a family, there's been some games that we've played where either I'm overwhelmed or even our 13-year-old and our 14-year-old are overwhelmed with just how many little fiddly bits there are and how many things. But when we think about it not from an adult standpoint, think about it from a kid's standpoint, we have to consider that kids aren't just short little adults. They do think about the world in completely different ways than you and I do. And we can spend time maybe on a later podcast talking about the developmental cognitive theories of Jean Piaget. But he's the grandfather of all theories of how kids think, or what's known as cognitive development. And he gave us a lot of insight into how kids' thinking changes over time. And he talked about there's 4 stages, just briefly. Babies and toddlers, and then roughly preschoolers, early elementary school age kids, then late elementary school age in through middle school, and then just about everybody else, teenagers and up. And if we think about playing games with people in each of those different categories, we have to think about the fact that there are different ways kids are going to approach thinking about a game, being overwhelmed by how much information or being overwhelmed with what the game looks like.
Can you give us an example of those differences you might see in a younger child and an older child and how they might approach a game?
Sure. So if you're playing with someone who's between the ages of, say, 3 and 6, so there's a lot of games where people really want to get their kids involved at sort of kindergarten. They've started kindergarten, they're 5, this is when they're going to school, and now we can really play some games with them. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that 5-year-olds aren't always great about taking other people's perspectives. They might not be great about holding a lot of information in their head at one time. They're certainly going to be less likely to consider lots of possibilities. And even 8-year-olds in that next category, according to Piaget, are going to have trouble with that. So, for example, last night we had family game night,
Yep.
and we played one of my favorite games, Sleuth. And I love Sleuth because it's about trying to sort of ascertain what information you've got, what information other people have, and trying to do your best of keeping track of all of that information. That would be an impossible task for a 5-year-old and probably even for an 8-year-old, because you have to consider how much information you don't have.
Right, and I didn't do all that well last night either.
You didn't, but you are better than a 5-year-old. Our 14-year-old son was phenomenal at keeping track of information, but that's sort of where you've got to make lots of comparisons and juggle information. That's something that even through middle school can be challenging for a lot of kids. But as informative as Piaget's theory is, there's actually a whole other theorist whose work really bears the issue of playing games, because we think of games as very social, as very language-driven, and as having common tools across them. And language and tools and social interactions are all earmarks of the theories by Lev Vygotsky, who was a little bit older than Piaget, but not by much. His work is perhaps not as well known as Piaget's, but Vygotsky's work was pretty instrumental in considering what he proposed as a socio-constructive perspective.
Okay, socio-constructive perspective. So break that down for us. What does that mean?
Sure. So Vygotsky was interested in looking at how we think and how that is informed by who we hang out with, what sort of tools are at our disposal, and then other pieces of culture like language. So, for example, gamers have a whole language unto their own, right?
That is very true, yes.
I'm sure if you go
We're
up
all
to...
very elite.
Well, no. But if you go up to a random person or friends of ours from other contexts who don't play games and say, hey, and make some joke about a meeple, not a language word that everyone's going to necessarily relate to.
Correct.
So language shapes how we play. And even in some of your podcasts, you've talked about how you talk about the representations you have in games. So those are very linguistically based. So Vygotsky talked a lot about all of those pieces that are part of our social context and how they inform how a kid thinks.
Okay.
So how we interact with others strongly helps our thinking. Or so the best example for that I usually use in my classes to talk about Vygotsky is if you talk about a kid who's trying to ride a two-wheel bicycle.
Okay.
And if you're a kid who has ridden either a tricycle or something with training wheels on it, the jump to taking off those training wheels and just going with two wheels is really considerably scarier than we think it should be as adults, right?
Right. That's why you have mom or dad hanging on to the bike then. Exactly.
But moms and dads intuitively understand, although they might not articulate it, that the problem with driving a two-wheel bike is that you've got to do two major things. You've got to balance, and then you've got to propel forward. And the kids don't have a good sense of that balance because every other experience to this has been, I don't have to do balance because I've got training wheels or I've got three wheels.
Okay.
So dads and moms running behind the kid and holding on are not trying to hinder the kid. They're trying to promote an interaction where they're taking off some of the load and they are making it easier for the kid to go forward and making that balance a little bit easier until kids kind of feel that sense of how you wobble back and forth until you get right to the middle there.
Okay.
And so Vygotsky talked about that as scaffolding, that we promote enough support and then we gradually diminish it until the child is able to do it on their own.
Okay. So how might that apply then in a game setting?
Well, that's an excellent question. In cases like we talked about last time with number sense, parents might count along with kids until they understand that kids are able to count each square independently,
right,
or that they have a sense of what order numbers go in. Or parents might reiterate the rules. Now, these are things we even do with our teenagers, right?
Right.
Ticket to Ride, you have one of three things you can do. But that sort of reiteration or sort of stepping back, and the hard part for parents is that you're going to have to take a step back from being in the game and step back and go, okay, wait, what does my child need help with in a game? So, for example, sleuth would be well beyond their capacity, as I said. But if you were trying to do something...
For a 6-year-old.
For a 6-year-old, absolutely.
5 or 6-year-old, yes.
So if you were trying to do something where they had to figure it out, you might help remind them with questions like, well, what information do you know? What information don't you have? And sort of prompting them along the way. But that would really be more helpful for a kid who's more 8 or 9. For a 6-year-old, you might have to make the game easier.
Okay.
So one of Vygotsky's other discussions he talked about, or the points he talked about, was what he called the zone of proximal development.
I like that phrase, the zone of proximal development. Now explain what that is.
Well, the ZPD is, if you think about it as where a child is as a center circle, that's the knowledge that they currently have. And then if you think about a circle that's a little bit bigger than that, that's the zone that is the knowledge that is proximal to them. It's close, but they don't have it. Okay. And then there is the last circle that is bigger than all three of those, which is distal, which means it's knowledge well beyond them. So, for example, if you have a kid who can do addition problems, like 1 plus 4 is 5, 2 plus 4 is 6. That is their current knowledge. That would be the center circle. The next circle out, that proximal circle, would be addition problems that they could probably do with a little bit of help. So problems of 10 plus 4 or 11 plus 13.
Okay.
Where they have all the math facts that they could do that, but they're going to, in order to get to that zone, they need a social interaction with a more capable person, like an adult or a
teacher.
Or a teacher, or a slightly older peer or a slightly more advanced peer. And therefore, Vygotsky said interactions are going to help advance the child's knowledge, so they're going to get out of that present knowledge and move to the proximal. But he also recognized that there's distal knowledge. That is, a child who can add two one-digit numbers together, but really needs some help with adding two-digit numbers together, is probably not ready for calculus. Calculus is that distal knowledge.
Okay.
So if we think about the idea that we want to play games that pull a lot on what the present knowledge of a child is, but that we could maybe push them a little bit to that proximal knowledge circle that's just a little bit beyond them. Mm-hmm. But if we can provide help in some meaningful scaffolded way.
Okay, to make that proximal knowledge gradually become knowledge that they actually have.
Exactly, so then their present knowledge circle gets a little bit bigger. So one of the ways I was thinking about this is escape rooms.
Okay, yeah, we've done a couple of escape rooms.
We've done the actual physical ones and those games, also the
escape rooms in a box.
Escape rooms in a box. And we actually went to a physical escape room about 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah, it's been almost 2 years now.
And so our daughter was about 11. Now, rarely do we're not going to have a whole bunch of 8-year-olds running around in an escape room, right?
Right.
Because their present knowledge is, we got to get out of here. And that's about all they can manage. They haven't quite got all the abilities to do all of the puzzles. Mm-hmm. When we went to that physical escape room, it was with 2 young teens, so an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old, adults and an older teen. And we were able to give the younger kids tasks to do, but they didn't necessarily solve all of the harder problems. We would give them, okay, here, look for this.
Right. Something very concrete.
Exactly. And so that makes it a lot easier. We took a lot of the cognitive load off of them.
Okay.
When we've played some of those escape rooms in a box with our kids, some of them are really frustrating. Because it goes back to that idea I mentioned with the game Sleuth, because you have to keep track of information. And there might be just enough knowledge if you gave them one puzzle that might be within their present knowledge, or maybe even just a little bit out of that into the proximal knowledge, and you could help them solve, matching up symbols or whatever that puzzle specific to that escape room might be. But if you ask younger kids, even younger teens, to do that whole escape room, you're going to find that what lives outside in their distal knowledge is keeping track of things, going through all possible combinations of characteristics. Young kids and teens are really good at skipping steps in terms of that. Right.
Now then, how can a parent use this idea of scaffolding and zone of proximal development to help their kids maybe learn more complex games?
Well, you have to be, first of all, in tune with what your kid does know.
Okay, yeah.
And certainly with what they like, because there are certainly some games where they might know a whole lot, but their interests are going to wane and it's not going to go well for anyone. But you've got to scaffold in ways that are natural to you, that are going to be ones that are, you want to use language that's naturally supportive and rather than sort of dictatorial. You need to move this space. You need to move 2 spaces is not a scaffolding. Saying, how many spaces do you think you should move? What do you need to do next? Where you're promoting the child to think for themselves, but giving them the tools as they go along.
Okay, but then also using the stuff that they already know about.
Absolutely. So, some of the ways that games can be exciting. Well, so maybe kids, you mentioned Sushi Go at the beginning here. Kids might not be fans of sushi, but they can do things like matching up things that look alike. And the sushi
Right.
and Sushi Go are rather appealing looking.
Right.
So they've got smiley faces.
Mhm.
They look like they're alive, which leads a lot into how little kids tend to think. They give, living characteristics to non-living things. So a smiling gnocchi roll is a lot more appealing than just
Right.
matching some random shape or color. It also makes me a little bit leery about eating sushi, but
Okay, well, this makes me think of a recent game called My Little Scythe.
absolutely.
Are you familiar with that one?
I am. In fact, we own it, and we've played it a couple times now.
For those of you not familiar with My Little Scythe, it was designed by Hobie Chow, a dad, and Vienna's daughter. Hobie really wanted to play Scythe by Stonemaier Games and wanted to share that experience with his daughter. But he knew it would be beyond her zone of proximal development. With Vienna's help and her love of My Little Pony, they designed My Little Scythe, which has been picked up by Stonemaier Games as a commercial product, which is now available. So, Jen, what does My Little Scythe do right with regards to scaffolding and the zone of proximal development?
Well, My Little Scythe is phenomenal. I am so impressed that this dad, and I think she was 5 at the time when they had designed this game, have really taken the crucial, if you will, or the core elements of Scythe and made them a lot easier for kids. So, for example, it streamlines the whole experience. As I said, we own My Little Scythe. We've played it with our 2 teens. We've also played it with 2 friends of ours, adults, and it is not a kid game in that.
Not in the least. I'm also using it in my cognition of game playing class with college age students, and they sometimes approach it with a little trepidation when they see all the pieces it does come with.
Oh, really? So have they played it already?
They have played it, and most of them have enjoyed it.
Good. I mean, it really is a lot of fun. And as someone who sometimes looks at the box and all of the fiddly bits, I was really impressed. So some of the things that My Little Scythe does right is that it has reduced the cognitive load, as I keep referring to it. So that is, it's reduced how many things you have to keep in mind at a time. We have also played Scythe, although we don't own it, and I frankly was overwhelmed. And in fact, it's very easy to make mistakes. We had one opportunity to play it, and so we were trying to get going, and we made some mistakes in terms of how to read the rules and where to start.
That's right. But I think had we not had the experience with My Little Scythe, I'm not sure
it would have been far
some
worse.
of us would have been able to have approached Scythe at all.
Absolutely. I was, I didn't manage to finish the game with you all, but it has...
Well, it is a much longer game. I mean, Christopher and I finished the game, and it was over 3 hours, I think, for our first game.
Yeah, well, so first of all, you can't play a 3-hour game with a 5-year-old.
Correct,
or
yeah.
even an 8-year-old.
Or an 8-year-old, yeah.
That's not going to hold their attention, and therefore it reduces the number of rules you have, the number of ways to win. And if you are familiar at all with Scythe, there are certain achievements or stars that you have to gain. And I believe it's 6 that you have to gain.
In the full game, I believe 6, yes.
6. And it's only 4 in My Little Scythe. So while that doesn't seem like a great reduction, it really is helpful for kids to know it's an achievable goal, because they might see, if they were to look at the original Scythe board as I did and went, oh my God, I'm never going to finish this game, or manage to get all of those. It's reduced the options of what you can do on a turn. The board itself is phenomenal, and the pieces designed to be very readable.
Right. Which was a good part of Scythe as well. Once you got into the iconography, it's more understandable because of how the player board is laid out and whatnot. But that's definitely carried over to My Little Scythe as well.
Absolutely. But Scythe obviously appeals to an older audience. So
Correct.
the iconograph, I apologize, I pronounced that wrong, but the icons, as well as the coloring and the storyline, this sort of postmodern World War II mechs and people, that sort of theme obviously is not very child-friendly, so the look of My Little Scythe is obviously much more child-friendly, but it's also made it easier to follow. You can discern the rules rather easily, as well as where you're supposed to go next. It's reduced the number of pieces you need to move around the board. Inside, there's, I believe,
you have the mechs. You have upwards to 4 mechs. You have the hero, the workers you can have. So I think you can have over 10 pieces that you're responsible for moving on the board. And my little side just has the 2 seekers that all do the same thing.
Exactly. So you don't have to distinguish between what this movement is for this piece versus this piece. So you've just got 2 pieces to move. And if you chose to just move one, you could still have a fairly fun game. Even if you decide for your child, it's just easier to move one piece for most of the board. Although there are some times where you'd want to move 2 in order to make it possible to get as many achievements as you want. It is, I found it just overwhelmingly engaging as a storyline, but it's also made it easier to follow the rules. So, for example, the dice, very clear whether or not you're rolling. That's one of the options you can do is make things, and so you roll, and you can put pieces on the board. So overall, it has the same flavor as Scythe, but it is a friendlier version, as well as reducing the cognitive load. Now, I have to say, the interesting thing here is, though, that it's not as if we're treating kids as smaller adults, as I said earlier. So this is not like the old game of Trivial Pursuit, and then you have Trivial Pursuit Junior, which is the exact same movements, the exact same board play, but the questions are easier. My Little Scythe has a different storyline to it. It has elements that are just a little bit easier to keep track of. So, example, pie fights versus, I forgot what it is in Scythe, where there's a warring kind of feature to it. There's differences in how you end game the game. So it's a lot. It's got a whole full flavor to it, that it's not just Scythe reduced. It's a game unto itself.
Right, but it's distilled, but yet it still has distilled Scythe down into its core elements, so that you still have that quote unquote Scythe experience that's enjoyable even for adults.
Absolutely. And in fact, our friends who we had played with had, the husband had made a comment to me that, well, now we have to go play Scythe, because we made them play My Little Scythe. I believe we only played one game of it with them, and it sort of whetted his appetite to play the actual Scythe game, or the adult Scythe game, if you will.
So Scythe is now in Dave's zone of proximal development.
I believe he actually could manage to play the game. Yes. Okay. He managed to do just fine. I think it was our 14-year-old son who beat all of us, as is often the case in playing games. But there are obviously other ways that we can think about this. Ticket to Ride, which I know is not one of your top games, but it's
still a good game, though.
It's a good game.
It's a good gateway game to get people into the hobby. Which kind of speaks to this whole zone of proximal development idea, I believe. Absolutely.
And I happen to love Ticket to Ride. Our son and I have a deep competition about who is better at this game. But then they've come out with different versions of it, including First Journey, which is the kid version of this, which has again reduced the load. There are shorter routes where you're putting your trains. You're not doing as many trying to count to get points. I don't think there's a point tracker in that game. I've never played it, but from the pieces I've read about it, it's just it's reduced it. It's also made it a little bit more kid-friendly in terms of its coloring, its iconography. Right. I now said it correctly. And it is has retained the elements of this so that kids could find it to be eventually where their memory span is bigger, so they can keep track of more information, or their interest is and their attention span is longer, so they would be willing to stick with a game for a longer period of time. But You're right, this is a great gateway game to get kids interested in playing games, and even getting your friends,
adult friends,
who might be like, look at all of the pieces in a box of Scythe and go, oh, I can't play this.
Yes, but they would be willing to play Milo Scythe or Ticket to Ride or some other game like that.
Absolutely.
Now, and this holds true not only for board games like we have been talking about, but for video games as well.
Absolutely. I can't play any video games, but I know our son, his interest in video games really probably was a result of you handing him a controller when he was a kid.
Right, and playing some of some kid games with him, like with Lightning McQueen and the Cars games, and there was a Winnie the Pooh game that I think we played, and kind of gave him some experience controlling a character on the screen and scoring points and interacting with the controller, and sort of scaffolding how you play more complicated games like he does now, like Fortnite, of course.
I don't think he plays that as much as other kids, thankfully.
Right.
But I do remember some of those early Nintendo. What version of Nintendo did we have?
Nintendo 64?
64 or something.
Yeah.
And I remember him playing like a Pooh Bear game and a Piglet game, and they were very. The narrative was very just follow the path through the 100-acre woods. There was no side quests as in some of the many video games that I know you and he enjoy. And so it was a very straight narrative of, well, you do this or you just keep passing it by. But you're right, it gave him a sense of holding a controller, understanding where there was a more gentleness in controls there where you could overcompensate and turn, and it would still let Pooh Bear get wherever it was. You didn't have to be dead on in your accuracy.
Yeah. Okay, well, I believe that will wrap it up today. Jen, thanks for taking the time to talk to us about scaffolding and the zone of proximal development.
Very happy to. I look forward to your next invitation where we can talk about issues that relate to gamers trying to engage their kids in playing games and making them lifelong game players as well.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to you all for listening to this episode. As always, I welcome any comments or questions you may have, so please email me, steve@cognitivegamer.com, and also visit my website, cognitivegamer.com. Also, you can like me on Facebook, Cognitive Gamer, or follow me on Twitter @cognitive_gamer. I'd appreciate it if you took the time to give this podcast a rating and a few kind remarks on iTunes or wherever you listen to Cognitive Gamer. This will make it easier for other people to discover the podcast. I appreciate those 5-star reviews. Until next time, remember to think about what you play and have fun doing it.